Hello everyone and welcome to session 2 of the Accreditation Forum. In this session, I am joined by Mark Stoddard, Director of Accreditation and BGA Services at AMBA and BGA, John de Silva Luiz, Professor of International Management, University of Sussex Business School, Lisa McAllister, Director of Accreditations and Quality, Excelia Business School, and Shannon Reid, Strategic Initiatives Analyst, Olin Business School, Washington University. In a moment, they'll be discussing the accreditation journey for business schools, examples from newly accredited and recently accredited business schools. But before I pass over to Mark, who will be the chair of the panel, I'd just like to let everyone know that we'll have a Q&A section at the end. So if you have any questions throughout the session, please type them in and hopefully we get a chance to answer them all at the end. If we do, however, run out of time, don't worry, we have a session taking place on Friday, the 9th of October at 10:30 AM BST, where we'll put forward the unanswered questions to Mark to answer. So without further ado, I'll now pass over to Mark.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. And before we start with the Q&A part of this this session, I'd just like to say that I've had the privilege to work with all three of our panelists today on their recent or relatively recent accreditations, and they all did an exceptional job in organising a very successful accreditation visit. So if you want to know how to do it right, you're in the right place, and pay attention, and I know they're going to share some really good and helpful experiences with you. So perhaps if I could just ask to start with, could you perhaps say a little bit about yourselves, to introduce yourselves to the audience, say something about your specific role in the AMBA accreditation process, and then just say something about your school and its current position, I suppose, particularly with regards to the current situation we find ourselves in. Could I ask Lisa to start, please?
Sure. Hello, everybody. So my name is Lisa McAllister. I'm Director of Accreditations and Quality at Excelia Business School in La Rochelle. La Rochelle is a town on the west coast of France. It's an ancient port town, and it's got a population of about 150,000 in the town itself, with a wider population. So it's a small to mid-sized town in France, largely dependent on the port, tourism, and a number of small industries. Our business school is about 3,500 students. Our Masters in Management is our flagship project with about 1,000 students enrolled. My job at the school and my role in the accreditations is obviously to bring everybody on board, to coordinate and be the representative of the school in relation to our accreditation bodies, and also to work with faculty, program staff and support services around aligning ourselves to quality standards, benchmark standards, and working through that system of continuous improvement. So I suppose I'm the person behind all of those, and they're fronted, of course, by our faculty and our programs. Finally, in the current climate, well, our school is open, thankfully. We have a mixed online presence, classes. Most of our lectures have gone online, and our tutorials and small grouping sessions are in presence or face-to-face in the school. It's going great, it's going good for the moment. We're obviously hoping that it will continue and we'll see more and more presence, but we're prepared to go 100% online if that happens. And obviously we've put a lot of resources now into supporting faculty to improve the online offering, improve our quality around our digitalization. So that's the current climate at the moment.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Shannon.
Yes, thanks for being here. And my name is Shannon Reid. I am the Strategic Initiatives Analyst at Washington University's Olin School of Business. So we're located in the United States in St. Louis, Missouri, and in the Midwest of the United States. St. Louis is a pretty large city, like 3 or 4 million in sort of the metropolitan area. And Washington University is sort of in the center of the city, and it has a student population of about 15,000 or so. The business school has a population of about 2,000, and we have a wide range of programs, an undergraduate business program, several MBA programs, full-time MBA, executive MBA, professional MBA programs in Mumbai and in Shanghai, and then a series of specialized master's programs. And I work with I'm on the administrative side in the dean's office, and I manage all of our accreditation processes and also rankings for the school. We are in class now, a mixture of online and in person. We went fully online in the spring and then spent really the summer preparing for the fall and to be able to deliver classes in the best way possible for students. And so we spent a lot of time doing sort of density studies and changing the configuration of classrooms and sort of choosing courses to be online versus in person, or a mixture of the two, depending on the class size and sort of the structure of the course itself. And so far it's going well. I mean, I think that the United States has had sort of a mixed response to COVID-19, and Washington University has taken it very seriously. So there's, you know, daily screening of people on campus. There's been widespread testing to be able to return to campus for everyone, and there's required testing every 2 weeks for students who are on campus.
Great, thank you, Shannon. And John?
Yes, so I'm a professor of international management at the University of Sussex, and I've also been the director of the MBA program for the past sort of 4 years or so. So Sussex is in Brighton, just south of London by the sea. And I'm also affiliated with the University of Cape Town, the Graduate School of Business there, and still help them with their accreditation as well. So at the University of Sussex, our MBA program is relatively small compared to and relatively young compared to our MSc programs. So our MScs, we have sort of numbers of probably close to 1,000, whereas our MBA program has around sort of 50 students on the MBA. You know, in terms of the current situation, like everyone, we got caught with COVID, with the COVID epidemic towards the end of March, and so we switched at that point towards online lectures. And in fact, I was actually in the middle of lecturing my particular module, and so half of it was in person, half of it was online. So that was interesting. Fortunately, we had developed quite a substantial asynchronous component to our program a few years ago. And I must say that actually made the transition quite a bit easier. And I think, so we had sort of, you know, some experience on the, in terms of the online component. And in terms of this semester, likewise, we've adopted a hybrid model. Lectures are officially starting this week. Applications are up, acceptances are up, but how it's actually going to manifest in terms of people in the classroom, we'll really only get a full picture towards the end of this week.
Okay, great, thank you, John, and I hope it all works out as you hope it does. Okay, so could I ask you, please, what was your school's major reasons behind pursuing AMBA accreditation? What did you hope to get out of it? Shannon, could you possibly start, please?
Of course. So, you know, we are a school that's based in the U.S., and it's not as common for schools to be accredited, U.S. schools to be accredited by AMBA, but our dean was the dean of a school in the U.K. that was had a triple accreditation. And so when he came on board in 2017, that was something that was of interest to him. So it became a strategic priority to become triple accredited. It became the first sort of major U.S. business school to achieve triple accreditation. And I think it's sort of a variety of reasons. One, that it sort of gives us access to to be judged based on sort of the highest international standards, and we view ourselves as a global business school, so we wanted to achieve that. Be able to get feedback from you know, international deans from other schools, and to be able to integrate their findings into what we do, and to also expose our faculty to those, you know, different perspectives, and also to build those relationships with international institutions.
Great, thank you. And what about you, John? What was your perspective on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been involved with AMBA accreditation at previous schools, so I had, you know, some sense of it beforehand. But, you know, at Sussex, as I mentioned, we have a relatively young MBA. And so we started this journey towards AMBA accreditation about 5 years ago. And I think there were various reasons. One is I think it provides confirmation and recognition that we are on the right path. We did quite a major reform of the program, and so this was confirmation. You know, we wanted confirmation that we were doing the right things. It is a seal of approval in terms of the international marketplace, and as I said, we got our AMBA accreditation last year. Applications and enrollments and acceptances this year are up, so hopefully there's a correlation there. And then also, I mean, it really is a part of a process of continuous improvement. You know, one has a sense of where one is getting things right and not, but I think feedback is vital. And probably the last point I would make is that it can also be quite a useful tool to try and push through reforms and renewal. Very often faculty get sort of caught in the status quo, and if you're trying to sort of push through something innovative, accreditation can actually be quite a useful tool to push for that.
Great, thank you, John. Lisa?
I think our school is quite internationally oriented. You know, there's, yeah, and I think we wanted to benchmark our program to international standards and to improve that quality by that alignment with internationally the best standards. So that was very much our international focus. I think as well, we also have graduates that are quite ambitious. You know, they're moving around internationally, and that sense of being part of the AMBA network as well was quite important. The career advancement and all the support services that are there from the career side, I think that was very, very attractive to us. I think as well, we were keen to meet with, you know, programs in other business schools who might be open to collaborate, exchange, evolve, learn. And I think finally, probably, you know, to be part of something that pushes us. It's a think tank, there's discussions, the Ambition magazine. Yeah, we wanted to be part of that movement, to be challenged, to be motivated, to keep up to date, to make sure we're relevant. So I suppose it's a combination of all of those brought us, yeah, to being interested in the AMBA accreditation.
Great, thank you, Lisa. In terms of starting the process, you know, could you maybe let our audience know what the first steps were for your school and sort of how you I guess how you initiated that process, and any sort of thoughts that you would want to share on that. Maybe if we could ask John to start on that one.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I mean, we have a relatively young MBA program, but we decided about 5 years ago to go on this particular, to apply for AMBA accreditation. And so at the time, we put in place sort of a 4-year project plan in place. And for us, the first steps were really firstly to undertake an exercise to examine our program against the AMBA criteria. I mean, it sounds relatively simple. It sounds like the obvious thing to do, but actually it was really important to look at it quite critically and to look at where the gaps were. And it became very apparent to us that there were gaps that we had to address in terms of our curriculum, in terms of our contact hours, in terms of committee structures, and so forth. So there was a lot that we needed to do. And then we just systematically put in a 4-year plan. You know, year 1 was to reform the program and take it through the university structures. Year 2 was then to implement or to launch the newly reformed program. Year 3 was then to look at the learnings from year 2 and make further refinement, which then gave us in year 4 the opportunity to have you know, a year of really, really clean data with which to go into the accreditation. So with us, it was a very sort of systematic, you know, project plan. I mean, I can go into details of any one of those, but that was the overall approach.
Thank you, John. Lisa, is there anything additional you want to share from your perspective?
Well, I suppose we were completely new to AMBA, so yeah, my first contact was in fact Mark. I'm not sure if you recall, but you gave us a talk at a network here in France, and yeah, it was the CGE, the Conference Grande École, of which we're a member, and I took a lot of notes at the time, and I followed up then with you with a Skype call. And I suppose those early steps were about understanding the criteria, understanding the process. I think you had given me a lot of feedback on the criteria and some of the things we initially had to do before we could even, move towards the accreditation. So we worked at aligning the program. And then the next step was really the on-site visit. Well, I suppose looking at our eligibility, as we were Masters in General Management, and fitting that criteria from the AMBA perspective. And then, yeah, looking at the standards and the curriculum was the next step for us. That was quite useful, and the feedback you gave us, Mark, on the program made us, reconsider the program and look at gaps that we had in the curriculum. So we had that alignment to do. And then as we went through that alignment, then we went through the various steps for the self-assessment, etc. So they were the initial, I think, was a lot of the contact with you, understanding well the criteria, getting the early feedback, early alignment, and then that second feedback, more detailed on the curriculum, the gaps on the curriculum, and using the principles there to guide us a little bit on some of the reform. And similar to John, it came at a time when we were looking at the curriculum. So the timing in that sense was great, because it was just before we were going into a program review. So that really helped. So it all kind of fitted then in the end. We then proceeded through the steps after that.
Great, thank you. And Shannon, you and I didn't meet in person until the morning of the accreditation visit for the first time, but obviously we communicated for a long time before that. Is there anything you want to add?
I think in our situation, the dean was very familiar with AMBA's guidelines, and so he was ready to sort of move forward pretty quickly. When he came on, I think maybe even just a few months after he started, those initial conversations began with AMBA about accreditation. It took us a little while to sort of get everything in place because there were some staffing changes. So I think that we really sort of started, like you and I sort of met after I joined Olin, and that was like in the summer of 2018, and so then we really started beginning that process more intently on gathering all the information and pulling it together. So in some ways it would have been nice if we had had sort of a more of a prolonged process in terms of the preparation for and looking at our programs, but I think that we sort of dove into the whole process pretty quickly.
Great, thank you. And what were the major challenges that you faced in terms of putting together some of the pre-documentation that's required before the accreditation visits kicks off? Lisa, would you mind starting?
I suppose the major challenges, I think we got, in terms of documentation, just to get organised, we broke it down into the steps that we needed to do. And we spent a lot of time, I suppose, using the time to explain to faculty and program and working with them around the process. The alignment on the curriculum was one of the things we had to work on. So I would say that we worked in parallel, I suppose. The curriculum was one process that was an alignment process. I suppose then there was, in terms of gathering the documentation, where we worked with the admissions, there was quite a lot of admissions criteria and quite a lot of detail there to collect and assimilate. So that was, yeah, in terms of collecting the data. A lot of the other information we would have had, like the faculty tables, we would have had that pretty readily. So for us, it was probably the detail, addressing the curriculum, I think, was probably the biggest thing for us. And then in terms of documentation, just the planning, getting organised, and running a couple of things parallel. AMBA asked a lot of information on the admissions, the details of the students. We do admission tests, so and we've quite a large number in the cohort, so we put that in separate annexes because it's a large program with a lot of students involved. So there was a bit of, I suppose, organisation there, but it was more about being organised and getting it organised and on the timing. We had probably most of the information, and programme alignment then was probably the key challenge.
And what was the sort of time frames that it took you, or do you think, in terms of putting all that documentation together?
Yeah, so just looking back, I would say globally that the whole process probably took about 2.5 years from the initial contact. By the time we got into the process, I think you had already given us quite a bit of feedback. So I think that we probably had a year where we were doing that programme alignment, standards alignment, the early phase of it, and then probably about a year and a half to the full accreditation, to the time we had the visit, as we went through the different phases there. So yeah, I think, and probably we took our time in that first year, and that was probably because, and I suppose some just to share with you, some of the alignment was we were a Masters in Management, a General Masters in Management, and I suppose we tended to concentrate sometimes on the bells and whistles in the programme, looking at, you know, specializations and looking at things we could add on. And we needed to look at our core. We were General Masters in Management, and that was our positioning on the market. And yeah, we needed to pull back and look again at that, and then reconfirm that, and then look at the principles and the criteria relating to that. So it was a very useful exercise, because we had tended to look at the bells and whistles and not concentrate enough on the core of the program that we were offering, and linking that with the needs of our businesses and the relevance in terms of the market for that. So that process, which took about a year, really reconfirmed the program in its market, in its relevance, and that helped us. So once we had that done, the rest sort of flowed a lot easier. Nevertheless, I suppose there was about a year and a half between the different phases to the final visit. So my first conference with you, Mark, was the end of 2017. I was just looking back at the dates. You know, we worked on that realignment in 2018, and then 2019 to April was when we had the visit, about a year and a half, if you like, in the active process of going through the different phases.
Thank you. And Shannon, anything to add?
I think for us, and I don't know if there, you know, I think this is sort of a common thing within higher ed, just sort of the systems that we had in place weren't always the best. And so there was a lot of sort of going back and forth, looking at the data, confirming dates, trying to make sure that we're really reporting the correct information. And that really takes a lot of coordination between, you know, the registrars, admissions, you know, graduate programs. And so that was probably the most difficult part of the process. And then, you know, because we're an American school, the terminology is a little bit different. We sort of look at things a little bit different. So trying to decipher, you know, what exactly, you know, you were looking for, and, you know, and sometimes that would be email exchanges between myself and Mark, just sort of, you know, understanding what the terms meant and sort of how we could pull that information from our systems. And sometimes we couldn't readily do that. We would have to sort of, there was definitely manual processes that were involved with that. We did go through the process fairly quickly because this was, you know, something of interest to our deans. And I think that Mark and I, we spoke first in July of 2018, I think, when I first started at Olin, and then we sort of pulled together our information. I think we sent in our application at the end of the year, like December, and then we spent, you know, 2018 sort of pulling all of our information together, and then we had our visit ultimately in October of 2019.
Thank you, Shannon. John?
Yeah, so very similar actually to the process that Lisa described. But what I would maybe just, let me rather give a piece of advice concerning the data sort of with, is to say that if this is your first accreditation, it is useful to work backwards and to start and to check a few years before that you're collecting the right data and keeping the right documentation and that you have the right committee structure. It really is not something that you can pull together at the last moment if the processes are not there. So it is actually useful to not only look at the criteria, but look at, you know, what would be required in the base room and start that process a few years before. Just to give one little example, what we did, you know, one of the things, if you look at standard 10, where it talks about return on investment and so forth, we didn't actively keep salary data for our students in the format that would have been helpful for this. And of course, there's various ways in which you can think of return on investment, but that was something that, you know, we started putting surveys in place a few years ago, so that we actually had, by the time we went for the accreditation, we had a few years of data and the like. So definitely start backwards, which may not make a lot of sense, but trust me.
That's very helpful, John. Thank you. I'm a little bit reluctant to ask this last question because I know the next question. Sorry, because I know I was your main point of contact for the accreditation process. But you know, perhaps could you share some of your thoughts on how you were supported by AMBA during the application process, and you know, in making the arrangements for the peer review visit itself? Shannon, can I maybe ask you to start, please?
Well, yeah, Mark was our contact, and you know, was always very readily available to respond to any questions that we had. I mean, I think that the process was fairly, I mean, it was well laid out, and we had all the sort of documentation of the standards and of, you know, examples of the reports would look like, and also a template for the visit. So that was all there, and I think it was really a matter of sort of thinking about our particular situation, trying to pull together information needed, and then really, you know, being able to ask clarifying questions, and we're always able to do that fairly quickly.
Thank you, Shannon. John?
Yeah, so I would say that with this accreditation, so at Sussex in particular, I took advantage of Mark quite extensively. So I feel like I need to apologize to him.
Not at all.
But you know, since we were embarking on it was again, you know, we were looking at a major curriculum reform. We had the opportunity to really do quite a substantial revision of the program, and so I actually had a few check-ins with him throughout the process to check that we were heading in the right direction and that my interpretation of some of the criteria was correct. You know, maybe just to highlight one particular example, and that was around asynchronous learning, which was new to us. We didn't have an asynchronous component, and it was something I wanted to introduce, but I needed to check with Mark that, you know, my definition of, was I understanding the definition of asynchronous appropriately? How would it count towards contact hours? So something like that. It's really important if you are going on this journey that, you know, you don't want to go too far down this road and then discover, you know, that there's some form of misinterpretation. And so several times I did check in with Mark, and I think that was an incredibly useful process throughout.
Great, thank you. I'd like to ask now a question about the base room, which is a really important part of preparing for the actual peer review visit itself to happen, and making sure you've got all the documents there, you know, in addition to all the documents you've already sent out to AMBA and the assessment team, you know, a few weeks in advance of the visit. So is there anything you want to say about, you know, any advice, any tips for setting that up? And I know, you know, Lisa, you will have, being that we had to conduct a visit virtually because of the pandemic, so that would be maybe a slightly different perspective from you. So maybe if I ask John to start from on a physical visit perspective, please.
Yeah. So so we still had a traditional visit, and I would say that even there, a question that arose, and as I said, I've been involved with this now for 15 years, and I have seen the way in which we approach base rooms change. So a question that now arises is, you know, what is the appropriate split between what is physically in the base room, what is electronically available on a memory stick or in some other format? And then, of course, so much of what we now collect is actually on the education platform. So whether you're using Canvas or whatever. So, you know, in the old days, we would print everything out, and you know, now we're doing everything sort of more and more digital. And so what I would say, where I did get tripped up slightly on the day was, you know, we had checked with IT several times that we would be able to give them access, the panel access to Canvas on the day, in terms of passwords and so forth. You know, something always goes wrong. And so, it took a little bit of time to, to just sort that out on the day. What I'd also say is it's important to, about 3 to 4 months before, really start developing digital folders with responsibilities assigned to various people in terms of who's responsible for collecting the information for which folders, and so forth, and then deciding closer to the time what the appropriate split is between those. Last point would be make sure that the base room is near where the panel is sitting, and then related to that, make sure that there is somebody on standby. The panel normally spends a couple of hours specifically dedicated to going through the material in the base room, so make sure that somebody is on standby to sort of provide some guidance on where to find things, that the table of contents is appropriate, and the like, in terms of them being able to find whatever they're looking for.
And also, John, to make sure that the panelists know how to open the cans of water. Yeah, so we were a bit stumped, but we shouldn't have been. But we were. Thanks. Perhaps maybe Shannon, if I could ask you again as the physical visit process, and any other insights you want to share.
Sure. So we did have a physical visit, but because there are so many documents and we wanted to provide them with a lot of access to things, and we didn't really want to print that many items. And so we had laptops set up in the base room, one for each of the peer reviewers, so they could look at all the information. We saved everything in Box, which is sort of the system that we use at the university. Because to access Canvas, you have to have a special university sort of security. We weren't able to get them access to Canvas, and so we really had to download a lot of materials and scan materials and have them available. And so we tried to keep them organized within Box, sort of by the standard, and then also sort of, class materials are also, integrated by class type of thing. So I tried to make the organization as similar as possible to what you would sort of find within the report itself, and so that you could sort of translate easily where you could find information. We also located the base room close to where all the sort of panel discussions would be, so it would be an easy walk, and people wouldn't get lost in the building, trying to find things. I was sort of part of the point of contact, so if there were any questions, and I sort of made myself available to them, gave them my cell phone. There was a phone located within the office and with everyone's numbers on it should they need to contact anyone. For us, I think the digital model worked well because we're able to sort of have a lot of people access the information and provide the information needed. And then if there had been any situation where we needed to go virtual, then it would have been easy to switch over to virtual because we had those documents in a digital format.
Thank you, Shannon. And Lisa, are there any sort of particular things you want to talk about in terms of preparing for the virtual visit? Because it worked extremely well, I have to say. So you obviously did some things right.
Well, I took a deep breath there because we were planning a physical base room up until 4 weeks before, and sort of it all happened on our lockdown we went from a Friday to be told we couldn't come in on the Monday, so we couldn't even come in to recuperate anything. So what we had. That said, we got special permission to go in to get some documents. So so just basically what we were preparing a physical one, but in physical we were still preparing a lot of online access. So we had organized with our informatique or our IT department to give access to our learning system. So it was MyLMS, so that we had already, we had ordered the codes and for full access, and that had been cleared. We also had access for Academ. It's our faculty management system, a bit like Serona or some of the other ones. Academ is what we use. And so that we had organized that our peer review team would have full access. We also have an internal intranet system, which had been set up and run by me. So I suppose I had it run in quite a quality perspective, putting in place all our processes, for staff and for students, so that in a bid to try and get everything as transparent, as accessible 24/7, it's there for everyone. So a lot of what we would have been showing was on our intranet system. And then we had already decided, and we had already started on OneDrive to go principal by principal, and we created folders principal by principal, and within those folders, subsections within those, or within those subsections, then we had links to our intranet system, links to our academic, links to our MyLMS, so that the peer review team could stay in the one place, and they were oriented at each time to where they could get the various information. So they could choose to go into the system and just wander around, or they could choose very specifically to check, I suppose, check proof, if you like, of documents which corresponded quite specifically to the criteria. So that was the link through system. And then we PDF'd things that weren't on my intranet or weren't, for example, student work, we had to scan it. And that was what we had to get special permission to go into the school for exam copies, exam papers, and examples of student work, you know, and we scanned all that up, and we put it again into the OneDrive system. Our only hitch maybe, so we had done that on OneDrive, and then we transferred it all into Teams because we were to work on Teams. And this was the system, Microsoft Teams, that the school had adopted. So that was fine. We got everything onto Teams. We did have, I'm not sure, Mark, if you were there for all of that, one of our auditors had a problem connecting to Teams. It was quite stressful for a little while because we had everything set up then in Teams. And it just was some very rare thing that happened between his university and they had team system, and their team system wouldn't allow access to our team system. It was quite unusual. Nobody had predicted it and was very tricky to solve. And actually, I think his son, who's quite a guru, managed to get the D-click to solve it. So that was really great and really helpful. Our backup plan, we did have a backup plan, was to go back to OneDrive. So, you know, we could have given access, and it was the exact same on OneDrive. But it was just, we kind of thought it was nice for them to be able with chat and with messaging to be able to be in the one space at the same time. So it worked. The lesson learned from it, though, is I would check connectivity the week or two beforehand. So now we were on the visit, if you like, later on in the week, and we had opened the base room earlier on the Monday morning. And I think by memory the visit was Wednesday and Thursday, so we were opening early. So I suppose we weren't in the hot seat exactly that day, but I would definitely advise everybody a week or two beforehand, check everybody's passwords, connectivity, because you can do that nice and comfortably. Let your IT guys sort out any, you know, issues that come up. So besides that hitch, everything else worked fine. So yeah, so I think for us it was great to be just able to give open access to everything, and then as I said, to create those folders principal by principal with the links through to everything, so that the peer review could easily find and quickly find things, so that yeah, it flowed, and it flowed along with the planning as well. So the only, you know, and then in terms of the visit itself, that's the base room preparation, I suppose.
Do you want to go on and talk about the visit, Lisa, if you want to? Because that was my next question anyway. Was the sort of, you know, any other sort of success stories you want to share with regards to the wider visit? And obviously, again, you know, you'll have a reasonably unique perspective amongst our panelists here, having done it virtually. Yeah. So yeah, just, you know, again, we were planning for a physical, and it kind of basculated, it changed very quickly at the last moment. So yeah, with Mark, we had the benefit of some feedback, because Mark, I think you had done 1 or 2 visits beforehand, and we got that feedback. Perhaps we reduced some of the participants in some of the slots, just to allow easier interaction. You know, we make sure people have their names up, their photos up. And we also did something for the team. We got photos of everybody and a little biography or a few words on them. And we did a kind of a visit book, so that they could visually see beforehand, in the order that they would be seeing everybody, who these people were. So students, alumni, program staff, faculty, and they had that book, you know, that they could study it up a little bit beforehand, so that when they met people on the video, they had, you know, a slight idea of who they were, what they looked like, what their roles were, and that was to help the interaction. And I think that was helpful.
So that was one thing, I suppose, it worked well for us. Reducing the numbers perhaps as well in the slots. And another thing that Mark had said was he had done 2 where you could see, we had teams again at the time, you could only see 4 people. And, you know, the feedback was, it's nice to see people. It's nice to be able to have the face in front of you and interact. So I had to battle quite hard to get Zoom. So I did. And yeah, my IT crowd weren't impressed. They wanted to go with MS Teams. But I just stuck to my guns, and you know, I wanted the experience to be good for the peer review team and also for the participants. You know, that they were at ease, that they could see these people were human to human interaction. You know, we all want something positive out of it in terms of getting feedback, being constructive, and helping us move forward. So I really wanted that ambience and that atmosphere. So, you know, I just went ahead, probably a bit headstrong there, and got the Zoom, and, you know, we took a business account, and there was emails flying around, you know, it's dangerous, and there was a lot of bad press around Zoom at the time, and you know, a lot of it was just because I think that some Zoom meetings were put on open Facebooks with no parameters, etc., etc. So, you know, a lot of the hype was taken out of context, and ours was purely professional. We weren't like advertising a house party on Facebook. I mean, you know, we were within a restraint. I didn't have any concerns about that. I mean, I didn't let it distract me. I just said, you know, no, we understand the parameters. We understand how it works. You know, we did take some time to get to know the workings of it a little bit, so that we could, you know, and bring people in, but we weren't in an atmosphere where people were going to have access to put up documents that weren't relevant to the audit, put it like that. No, everybody was engaged in terms of our students. So the feedback was very positive from our students, from alumni, faculty, staff. Everyone found the ease of use great, and it was a big bonus to be able to see people. So that was something, I suppose, I had to push a little bit for and just do it, and it worked. Now, since Microsoft Teams have resolved that problem, and I think that, you know, now we can have a lot more people visually on the meetings. So that was our experience, but and it was, you know, people were a little bit reticent, of course, beforehand, but it actually worked out really well. We felt that we got a really good quality visit. Everybody did. We felt that people had time to exchange. It wasn't rushed. It was very natural. The peer review team went to a lot of trouble to put people at ease as well. So it was very professional, and we were very appreciative. Overall, it was a very good experience for us.
Thank you, Lisa, and hopefully sooner rather than later we'll be back to physical visits, but we don't know when that will be. But Shannon, John, do you want to share any particular elements from your experience? And perhaps if I could ask you, maybe specifically, not just on this element, but also could ask you to share something about you know, the possible challenges of getting other stakeholders involved in the visit. So particularly thinking about, you know, alumni and possibly employers as well. You know, how you address that particular issue.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. I think we were fortunate in that we worked with a couple of different groups to sort of generate lists of students and alumni to, you know, before we did the reach outs to them about participating in the visit. So we worked with Advancement, which is sort of our organization on campus that deal with alumni. We worked with our graduate programs office to identify students in all of our programs, and also we have sort of key sort of corporate relationships, and so we sort of pulled together a list from these different areas of the school and did reach out to those groups, and we had a very good response. I think particularly, if I'm recalling correctly, I think we had a lot of alumni, so we had to sort of split them into 2 groups because the groups were getting a little bit too large. One of the things that we did do to attract people is we sort of positioned those meetings right after lunch, and we sort of had a lunch so that people could come and sort of mingle and meet one another and sort of reconnect with faculty, with alums, with employers, and also meet the assessment team, and then sort of had the other sort of discussion sort of right after that. So it was a nice mixture of being able to sort of have a social aspect of things where people could reconnect, and then have the panel itself. I will just mention that we did have in the past year, so we've had our on-site visit, which we had with AMBA. Then we also had a subsequent re-accreditation visit that ended up being virtual. And sort of to piggyback on what Lisa was saying is that I think that it's important, if you end up having a virtual visit, is really sort of pretty sizing the size of the panels down, I think is really helpful, because if you have a really large group of 20 some people within a panel, it gets very difficult to have a good discussion, because if you're doing introductions or you're sort of going in between screens and things like that, it's really helpful to sort of have the size of the group be a little bit smaller. And in some cases, we also had facilitators to help so that the assessment team could really just be engaged in the conversation, and the facilitators could be there managing all the IT issues, or, you know, if it's on the faculty side, sort of fielding questions and sort of being able to direct questions to certain faculty members, or being able to, you know, respond, like if there are things in the chat or anything, to respond to those things. So if you end up having a virtual visit, hopefully they won't go on for that long, but some of those things are pretty helpful in terms of having them go smoothly.
Thank you, Shannon. And John, anything to add?
Yeah, if you have a physical visit, just a small tip, I think if it's your first accreditation, it's useful to have a green room for people from your school to meet, you know, at least sort of 45 minutes before, both for a rebriefing. Obviously, you've done a briefing sort of, you know, a couple of weeks before, but a rebriefing, and then also afterwards a debriefing. I think the debriefing is really important. It's important that information is being fed back from one meeting to the next panel. You know, in case the panel sort of picking something up and a theme is emerging, I think, you know, Mark, you know that this is happening behind the scenes, and I really do think that's really important. In terms of the, you know, the broader stakeholders, I think it partly also depends upon, you know, how substantial the MBA is as part of your school. So, for example, at the University of Cape Town, the MBA program is really a very, very substantial part of the graduate school. Whereas at Sussex, it's a much smaller program. And so as a result, we had to work very hard to make sure that everybody who's part of the MBA team, the broader set of stakeholders, no matter whether they spend 100% of their time on the program or only 10% of the time on the program, that they feel like they're active stakeholders. And this is something we had to work on very deliberately, that everybody had a stake in this process. I would also just mention, in terms of alumni, this was a little bit tricky for us, in that alumni is centralized. So the university has a centralized approach towards alumni at Sussex, especially as regards the database, whilst we like to keep it as close as possible within the MBA program. So there's always a little bit of tension around that. And likewise with the career side, with employers, this is something which at Sussex is fairly centralized. And so also just how you build up the sense of you know, everybody having a stake in this process becomes really, really important. And how you approach that differs depending on how, you know, how important the MBA program is within the school.
Thank you, John. I'm aware of time, and I really want to leave some opportunity and space at the end for some questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold a couple of questions back, and I'm going to combine some of the other questions into one big question. And, you know, feel free to jump in and add bits and pieces as you see fit. So, you know, I think you'd be really interested in learning, you know, what would be your message to a school considering going for AMBA accreditation? You know, why do you think they should do it? Hopefully you can say they should do it. And, you know, what pieces of advice would you give on guiding a school through re-accreditation or initial accreditation that we maybe haven't covered yet? And what was your biggest learning or takeaway from the AMBA accreditation process that you went through? Perhaps I'll ask Shannon to start that one, if that's okay.
Sure. I don't know if I can keep track of all the questions. I would say that just good. In terms of like the learning of the process and sort of the value of it, I think that it's just, the day-to-day operations of a school, sometimes you just get caught up in the day-to-day operations so much. And I think it's very valuable to have sometimes a structure or a process that sort of has you take a very comprehensive look at your programs and from a different perspective than maybe you're looking at. So for us, I think that was very valuable. It provided an opportunity for a bunch of different stakeholders to really discuss things about all of our programs in a way that maybe wouldn't have taken place just because we're so busy doing other things. And so I think that was very valuable. It also has you sort of put in process a lot of things that aren't necessarily always the priority as you're going through the daily operations of the university. So I think we all found that really valuable, and it sort of helped us pull together. I think it helped us really get to see that we're actually doing the things that we said that we're doing. And, when you look at your strategic plan, or you try to have your strategic plan, and you start looking at the different criteria and then being able to align that with your strategic plan, it also gives you an opportunity to actually assess how you're doing and how you're implementing things that you hope that you'll be able to do. So if you can sort of align your strategic planning process also with accreditation and sort of doing those things concurrently, I think is very valuable. And I think we all really enjoyed the process. I mean, it is work, no doubt, but I think we all found it very valuable, and it gave us insights into the school, and really writing the report has been very valuable in a lot of ways, and using that information for other things. I think that if you can look at it as a very holistic sort of process, all these things really complement one another.
That's great, thank you. John, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would also just say accreditation can also be useful to provide a stronger sense of team and belonging to all stakeholders, which is a surprising. I mean, you don't really necessarily think about that as an outcome. As Shannon mentioned, I think it identifies areas that you need to work on. I mean, we clearly knew the areas that we did need to work on, but it gave us a sense of priority and urgency in terms of what it is that we need to focus on. I would also say adopting a journey philosophy. I think one of the things, and as maybe talking a little bit about the re-accreditation from some other schools that I've been involved in, I think it's important to see accreditation as a continuous process. I think the wrong way to see it is as something as an event, because then what happens is that accreditation fatigue sets in amongst all stakeholders. So I think how you frame accreditation within the school is really important.
Thank you, John. And Lisa, any other insights?
Yeah, sure. I do think one of the key benefits was to pull back from our day-to-day and reflect on what we do and why we do it. And that was a question that came out sometimes, was why were we doing certain things? And it made us think about it. We got a really useful report, very insightful, a really useful report to help us for the next few years. And I suppose finally, I think for us being part of the network, well, we wanted to be part of something that was motivating and challenging and insightful to help us, be improved, to challenge us. And finally, my advice, I suppose, and we're starting the journey with AMBA because we've just been accredited recently. I do think what you put into it is what you'll get out of it. So it is about, as the other my colleagues have said, your approach to it, and yeah, what you put in is what you get out.
That's really really valuable. Thank you for that. Right, so we have got some questions here from our virtual audience. So I will rely on our moderator Paul to tell us when to stop, because I'm sure we've got far too many questions with the time available. So the first question I've got here is can you give us an idea of the workload involved in collecting the data that's required? I think we sort of tried to cover that in terms of probably at a higher level. I think this question is probably looking for a more detailed sort of micro response. So the workload involved in collecting the data.
Well, let me make one little point, which is don't think that when you have finished writing the report, that's the end of the process, because that's, a lot still happens between. So the process really goes through different phases, and before you put together your self-assessment form, there's a process that leads into that. There's a process that leads between the SAF and the SAR, the form and the report, which is probably the most intensive. But then also the period between when you submit the report and then the actual accreditation panel. So from that point of view, the workload is, just changes. But I would say, don't underestimate the workload in each of those three phases.
Thank you, John. Does anyone else want to add?
Well, I suppose it depends on your starting point as well. So I mean, we've quite a large program. So again, we, similar to Shannon, we had to work with the admissions to get all that data collected. It's not something that we would compile in that way normally. So that was, stuff we had to do. Definitely there's phases in terms of writing, in terms of and then there's phases in terms of the base room. And again, we used it as well. We re-looked at things and we decided to use it to update certain processes that needed to be updated. So you invest the time in doing that, but then it's over and above what just the visit brings to you. So I do think it's a difficult question to answer. But just on sheer preparation, I mean, there are months of preparation, and it's more intense depending on the time you're at in the phase. And then what you want, how much you're going to put in or how you're going to use it to update other things and where you're at in those.
And Shannon, I imagined you working extremely hard on accreditation, and mostly accreditation, because the rather condensed period at which you went through it. I mean, was that pretty much the majority of your role for that time, or did you have space and time for other things? I mean, how would it affect you directly as process?
It was a lot of what I did, but I mean, we were sort of going through a bunch of different things at the same time. So I think one of the things that was valuable for me in my role, at least, is I worked very closely with our vice dean of faculty, and so and also with our vice dean for like globalization and programs. And so being able to work that as closely with those individuals really helped smooth over the process in terms of working and getting information from different faculty members on the research side, but also in terms of coursework and things of that nature. I would say that as soon as you can, if you're working with a variety of different people within the organization, is really to show them the type of information that they will need to collect, so they can sort of digest that and start thinking about how they would go about collecting that information. Like on the admission side, it took them sort of months to pull together the information, because we're talking about they have, they're busy with their regular workload, but then adding this on top of it and dealing with multiple programs and multiple cohorts as they come in. The data is always changing, because when you first start, you have this many cohorts that you're looking at, but by the time you finish the process, you may have an additional 1 or 2 cohorts that have started, and so that does change the information you have coming in and all the other things that you report. So I think getting those people on board as soon as possible is valuable. In terms of writing the report, we had actually decided that we would use an outside writer to help us write the report. And so we did a bunch of different interviews and everything to sort of gather information. Unfortunately, that person became ill in the middle of that process, and so I ended up finishing the report. And so I think there is some value in that, in terms of there's a consistent voice within the report, and then you can sort of tie together the different pieces of the report if one person is doing all that. But it does create a pretty significant burden on one individual to sort of gather the information on the SHIG side or the faculty side or the programs admission side and pull all that together. So it gave me a very big strategic look at the school and a very good point of view in that regard. But I think every school will have to think about the best way to do that in terms of the timing and be able to meet all the deadlines in terms of completing the report.
Thank you. And the final question is specifically related to virtual accreditation visits. So I suppose this is for you, Lisa. I feel like we've covered parts of this anyway. So the question is, how does the virtual accreditation visit work in terms of the facility visits, the tour of the premises, and how does it affect the availability of data in the base room?
Okay, well, I suppose in terms of the facility visit, as it had happened, Mark, you had been on an on-site visit the year before. So I suppose we weren't, it wasn't 100% virtual in that sense. So, and again, I presume things will open up. So hopefully we won't be in a situation where we're faced with everything at distance. So we had that on-site visit from Mark, where you were able to see the facilities. Afterwards, we did put a lot of photos in the base room of the library of facilities, of classrooms. We went around that day. Actually, we got permission to go into the school. We took lots of photographs of the place, and we had stock photographs too, but we took other photographs just to give a sense of the place. Then we replicated the visit just in an identical way, virtually, as to a real life or a visit and presence. And then in terms of the data, well, with similar data, obviously, the brochures, you have them online. I mean, we lots of our faculty publications and books and research, and nice things we'd have liked to show that you can touch, pick up and feel. You just have to do your best to try to present those, in the form that they're in. And the key to that is as organized as possible so that they're easily found in the section where they're most relevant and they're found with just a click. And that there's a title, and I suppose for foreign schools as well, just to think about putting the titles in English, something that you just might forget. And we're a French school, and sometimes a lot of the documents, even if they're in English, the titles could be, in French because somebody French has stuck to them somewhere. So just again that they're readable very quickly and accessible very quickly. And just to pick on a point that John said, we actually did the debriefing online as well. I found that really helpful. I think people have given in the exchange, they're a little bit stressed and they need to debrief. They want to tell you how it happened, and you want to take that time with them too, to say thank you. And so we did that, and it was organized in parallel. So different members of different teams, we had different people, hosting those debriefings, but we did do them. We weren't sure whether we would, but we did in the end, and we were very glad we did. And it worked. Again, it worked just as well virtually as it did in presence. So it's again just that concept that John shared about having a debrief afterwards.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. We've got plenty more questions, but we'll have to leave it there. So I'd just like to say, thank you very, very much to Lisa, Shannon, and John for sharing your insights with us. It's been a really interesting and insightful session, and I'd just like to hand it back over to Paul now to close us out.
Thanks, Mark. Also, thank you, Lisa, Shannon, and John. Great session. Just to echo what Mark was saying, I'd just like to let everyone know that the next session will be an interactive networking session, which will take place at 3:30 BST. So details on how to join that session are inside the join instructions. So this is via Zoom. So obviously, if you'd like to join that, click the link inside the join instructions, and it will take you to the Zoom account. The session is recorded, so following the event, we'll send out a post of event content, so there'll be details on how to access the recording. Obviously, also you can listen to all the sessions which have taken place over the Accreditation Forum. So lastly, I'd just like to thank Lisa, Shannon, John, and Mark for an excellent session, and we look forward to seeing everyone on a session again soon.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.